Aloha and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Got Your Six podcast. This six-question podcast brings together high performers to share their methods, strategies, and ideas, delivered in an informative and, most importantly, actionable way that'll help you lead yourself and those around you from the battlefield to the boardroom. Coming to you every episode, I'm your host, Tony Nash. And into the breach.
Nothing mentioned on this podcast is an endorsement or opinion of the Department of Defense.
I got your six, we got your back. Got your six, we got your back. Got your six, we got your back. I got your six.
Sixers, what an absolute treat we have today. I could call her a unicorn. I could call her one in a trillion. There's lots of different ways we could go about to open this episode. And I think we go with her tagline, experience is priceless. Because this is essentially Hitch if you're looking at employment. Misty Cook from Concierge On Call is here today. Misty, thank you so much for being on the Got Your Six podcast.
You bet. I'm so excited to be here.
We talked about before the show started, and I thought it was really, really interesting. How after 20 years did you think you were suffering from imposter syndrome in the Marine Corps?
You know, whenever I got out, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. But what I have done is I have read so much about business. And you can't find me without AirPods and listening to a book after another, because I know there is not enough time in the day to keep up. And so learning as much as I can, I know that I've seen it. And I've seen it even with my own clients, that they encounter certain things and they start to hesitate. Or maybe they just make an excuse for not showing up or not wanting to be a part of a panel or going to consult for certain things. And really what it comes down to is, do you feel like you're enough? Do you feel like you're adequately prepared or you have enough experience? And so imposter syndrome can just you don't know that there's a title for it, but once you start to read about it, you're like, man, I just want to make sure that it's almost like your spidey senses are up and there's a red flag that if you catch yourself saying, nah, I don't want to go. Maybe it's just that you're scared, and there's a little bit of fear there. So it's to try to overcome that. And I think, as veterans, we're all aware of okay, we've got to push through. And so when you see yourself do that, it's okay, this is where you push through and you find out, you know what, actually, I know exactly what to do and I know exactly what to say. And I can, sit at this table just like the rest of you. So
having, I think that's a great definition. And as you look at it, do you have a specific example where you were suffering just massive imposter syndrome and you got through an event or whatever it was and you look back and you're like, what was I worried about?
you know what? No. No, I have been very crystal clear on exactly what I want to do and how I want to do it. And I think, you and I spoke a little bit, but it's kind of I think when you walk into a room and you know your value, you just are very convicted about that. And so I know what I bring to the table and I know what kind of value I can bring to my clients. And so I think you just have to work on it. If that is something that happens to you and it's a real thing, no, I've actually never felt that way. It's been 5 years. I was planning this business for 5 years before I even left the service. It was my hobby before it was my full-time job.
And that's interesting that you did that, because it wasn't something you just came up with one day and you're like, all right, this is the direction I want to go. You were very tactical about that. You talked about defining your value in that sense. How were you able to understand what that value is and what it is to others?
Yeah. So I remember exactly where I was standing, but General Kelly was at a retired EOS. And really, I tell everybody, it's the executive offsite for our retired generals in the Marine Corps. And so we bring them all back once a year and make sure that everybody's on the, has the most up-to-date information on what's going on with policy. And he was standing there and I asked him how retirement was going. And he expressed some pain points that were happening because they go from having a staff of 20 people to them sitting at their kitchen table, Googling how to start an LLC. And journal officers are just like anybody else that's starting a business. And so they're by themselves. And so as he was expressing all of these things like travel and coordinating events and coordinating meetings, and he's naming every single thing that I do currently as an active duty Marine staff secretary. And I'm like, you know what? Like, they still need help, and they become very, highly in demand, and they become still the same level of strategic thinkers when they're retired. And so I'm like, I should recreate this staff that helps them become and perform at that same level so they can stay at 30,000 feet and I can stay at this tactical level and make sure that, meetings are coordinated and flights are taken care of and all those things. So yeah, it was a General Kelly moment about 5 years before I retired that I'm like, there's something there. And so I just started putting the pieces together. I told everybody that I knew. Every time somebody would say, what are you going to do next? I would say, I'm starting my own business. And some people didn't like that, Tony, I'll tell you. They were like, don't tell people that. Like, you don't know, you might change your mind. Or
Really?
people are going to think you're not serious about the Marine Corps. I mean, like, there were people that pulled me in their office and said, don't tell people that.
So what did you say to them when you have to have that? Because that's a hard conversation to have.
Yeah. That particular person, I said, like, I felt like, one, it's not illegal for me to say this isn't my next goal, but I think it goes back to like, these are the types of people that have never transitioned and they don't plan to transition in the next 10 years. And so they're telling me that, but that's because they've never, had to start considering what are some of the next options. And I knew at 20 years, that was what I was going to do. And so I think, I just said, this is my plan. I'm not changing my mind. I know exactly what I'm doing. And I want to make sure that the world knows because, when it comes down to it, I don't have a commercial. I don't have anything. All I have is me telling people who I am and what I do. And it's people like you that spend time with us to say, like, share any kind of valuable, get our name out there to tell people how, you can get in touch with us. And so I think for that particular instance, I just didn't even take it seriously.
Yeah, no, and there's nothing wrong with that. So you also touched on something that was interesting, of being a current service member and then having someone in your formation talk about retirement, transitioning, ETS, whatever it may be across the service. What advice would you give to current service members helping people transition so it's not just like, all right, how you doing, keep it moving kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say the first thing is asking questions. First, think about what it is that you want to do. If what your current job is does not light you up in the morning, then maybe that's not what it is. And so it's, seeking out early on what kind of certificates or things that you need to be able to go into that next industry. And then I would say the second thing is LinkedIn is such a powerful tool, and probably the way you found me, right? So I think using some kind of social media and LinkedIn as a professional network, that you start asking questions. You tell people in those industries that you're interested in, hey, I'm a veteran and I'm really interested in what you do. Would you give me 15 minutes, or can I buy you a cup of coffee? I mean, you can filter by your local area. And so sitting down with those people and learning about what they do, and then the more time they're investing in you, you might find that they say, you know what, there's a position here, but you've got to nurture that relationship. So I'd say, broadening your network outside of DoD. Don't just keep asking, service members and government service what you should do in transition, because they've never transitioned. So
Right.
ask the people in that, industry about what you should do and how you should do it to get there.
And with that, right, let's look at the flip side of the people that are staying in service. How can they best help somebody transitioning out of service? From your perspective?
That's such a great question, because how can you really help them when you're sitting there and you've never done it yourself? I would say, man, that is such a good question. You probably need to educate yourself on the fact is that we're all going to get out eventually. And you personally growing your own network and being able to introduce that person that says, you know what, I'd really like to go into IT. I'm sure you know somebody. And so maybe making that introduction, there's so much easier to have an introduction, a warm introduction by someone that they know and say, hey, would you mind talking to this sergeant? He's getting out next month. You probably know somebody. So I would say that building your network outside of DoD so that you can support the men and women that are like your subordinates is probably my piece of advice for those people, because there's nothing easier.
And that goes along with
Yeah.
your mantra too of what, surrounding yourself with people that will mention your name in a room full of opportunities, right? Because all you need to do, like, even though you haven't gone through transition as a current service member, you just need to allow somebody to be inside that room and then let them take it from there.
Yeah.
I think that's
Right.
an
Yeah.
absolute great point.
Yeah. I think, and it's only going to help you in the long run, right? You're going to get out too. So building your
Right.
own personal network and joining professional organizations outside of the military. I know we get kind of sucked into like, the commandant's reading list or whatever, but on war can only take you so far. Like it's like Clausewitz can only do so much, but
Right.
eventually you're going to get out and you're going to work for a company that maybe that's not on their reading list. So
Yeah.
building a network in private industry is important.
And speaking of being a lifelong learner, you mentioned that you're always having an audiobook in your, what are you listening to these days?
Let me think. So I just finished over the holidays. The 12-week year is one of my favorite books. Do you like it? Okay. So
Solid.
I think that's just been such a valuable tool and really being honest. Actually, I posted today about, grading yourself at the end of the week for your goals, and being honest with yourself instead of just saying, yep, I did a good week. Um, I love Be Brave, Not Perfect. I think we get really caught up in being perfect or not starting something or being hesitant when you're like, you know what, it's just not right. But you know what? Like, it's never going to be perfect. Um, I think being brave, I'll tell you a story. The commandant, so they have this retired EOS, and so fast forward, I knew that the retired EOS was going into town. And as a networker, and these are potential clients of mine, I knew that the one place in the city that I needed to be was that garden. Like they were having a social. And I'm like, how am I going to get there? And so I'm like, I could either be brave and I can ask for an invitation, or I can sit right here and I'm not going. And I had just read the book and I'm like, what's it going to hurt? Like I know somebody that could get me one. And I can just say, and if you can't give me an invitation, no problem. I mean, no, my feelings aren't hurt. And 2 days later, I got that invitation, and that Friday night, I'm standing in the middle of that garden with 50 retired generals that are my potential clients that I got to shake hands and say, my name is Misty Cook, and I can help you transition, right? And so it's all about putting yourself in those rooms. And even though it might feel a little awkward, it didn't hurt, and I wouldn't have gone if I didn't ask. So that's just been a powerful book for me.
Is that the question that you ask yourself when you're kind of on the fence of whether or not to like push into an opportunity? It's like whether I'm going to stay here or, I can actually maybe have a better, 1% is better than 0%.
Yes, exactly. Yes, there's this small little voice in the back of your head that you're like, should I do that? And then you're like, no, like what is going to hurt? And if it's not going to hurt anybody, then you just push the door in, because nobody is coming to get you to say, would you love to go to this party, this perfect party, or this perfect networking event? When it comes to networking, I will tell you, one of the most powerful things is not saying no. And I use this analogy of buying a cup of coffee. I offered to buy this gentleman a cup of coffee. And I said, if you would give me 30 minutes of your time, I would really appreciate it. I just want to pick your brain. He was a business owner and he was a retired Marine. So I said, he was like, better yet, I'll buy you lunch. I'm like, perfect. So he buys me lunch and he starts to talk to me about networking. And he's like, if you get the opportunities, you say yes. And I'm like, of course. 2 days later, he writes me a note and says, I just bought a table at the Maryland Chamber of Commerce. Somebody just fell out. I bought a table of 10. Somebody just fell out. Can you replace her tomorrow? And I'm like, I felt like a test, Tony. I was like, well, we just talked about networking, so I have to say yes. So I'm like,
Right.
yeah, sure, I'll be there tomorrow. So I go, and to my right is this banker, and I start talking to him. Fast forward, he is the philanthropic arm for his bank. and it's all veteran organizations. So then we start to make our own relationship, and he starts inviting me to opportunities. So you could go back to and you'll see me and David at multiple things. He's like, you want to be my plus one? You want to be my plus one? Yes, yes, yes. All the way to an opportunity that I met the Washington Commanders back office. And that was, hey, we're starting this Defense Alliance partnership program. And we would love, and they tell me, and I'm like, I would love to bring my clients to that. And so I tell them who my clients are. Yes. So fast forward, that cup of coffee got me to the Partners Club drinking champagne. And it took 4.5 months of yes, yes, and yes. And that's networking. That's like just continuing to nurture a relationship all the way 10 people later. It's not whoever's standing in front of you. And then if they aren't, they don't bring value to you and you don't bring value to them, and then the end. It's all about the next person and maybe the fourth person, But sometimes I think we just get either too busy or too lazy to continue to say a yes. And then we're like, oh, that person's not any value to me. They're not going to do anything for me. And it's like, you're right. But the 10th person, had you said yes, that would have opened the door you were looking for.
Right. And that's a classic, like improv, like day one, if you go into an improv class, reading about that, like with Amy Poehler, yes, and right. It's like, yes, I want to do this. And we can also do and that forms collaboration, which then can just continue to forge a relationship. What do you say to people that would look at that and say like, oh, you're just using people?
I think, one of the things I've told somebody the other day was when you're on the phone and you're like networking, you always end it with, who do you need to meet and how can I help you? Because I know somebody you need and you know somebody I need. And so none of those relationships walked away where they were like, well, let me just introduce you to the next person. And I didn't say either let me help you or let me introduce you to somebody. And so I think that's probably the part behind the scenes that you don't see. It's always about, and maybe that's a good reason why you've got to expand your network outside of DoD, because when you offer that, you need to be able to say, here's my resources, and you need to meet somebody and I'll introduce you to somebody else. And you can't do that if you've just lived in this DoD silo for so long.
Right. And then there's no other, like you said, there's no other experiences that you can kind of help to like connect. What is the opening question in that sense, right? Like usually in an opening question to meet someone, you say like, where are you from? Kind of what do you do? What questions do you look to avoid asking when you're meeting someone for the first time?
I usually avoid asking. I usually ask them like, who's their audience? Like, what's their like most recent? Who are they trying to get in front of? And then when you start to hear like, what are some of their challenges, to see if you could be the person that meets that pain point and says, you know what, I know somebody that could help you do that. So I think the conversation can be listening to what is their daily job, what's their mission, and what are the challenges that they currently have, so that maybe when you get to the end and you say, you know what I could do is I could introduce you to Sally because she's actually a bookkeeper and she's amazing. And I hear that's something that's really challenging for you. So I think it's just kind of keeping your ears open to like, what is when they complain or they're kind of like thinking about what gives them pause throughout the day, that you can solve for that. And I think that's what I've just tried to do for the last year, is meet as many people to make sure that when somebody says, I wish I had this, then I might not know the answer, but I definitely know somebody that they can meet,
Right. And it's remaining engaged in that conversation, because it's very easy to ask.
Yeah.
Where you're just like, oh, this, that, or the other thing. But when you really care about what that answer is and you're listening, you're not just trying to formulate to sound smart and be like, oh, that. I know that was very.
That's a great point.
That wasn't the best way to go about it, but.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. No, it does keep you engaged because you're constantly thinking, how am I going to help them? Who am I going to introduce them to? And I think it's such a two-way street that we just don't have to network when we're, inside the service. I mean, your people are your people. You all have the same, culture, and you don't have a bottom line. You're not trying to like get your paycheck, and if you don't do something, you're not getting paid. It's just a different mentality when you're creating opportunity so that somebody can like actually do business with somebody. And so you're constantly thinking of ways to help them or introduce them to the right person. So it's definitely a two-way street. And I even told somebody on the phone or on a message once, I'm like, they were like, could you help me do this? And I'm like, yes, just to let you know, in the future, you should say, what can I help you with? And they responded like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. But they didn't say it. I was like, okay, hopefully the next person gets that. So, yeah.
And that's a great point too of like, so, sorry, we'll back up. Sean will take the last couple of seconds out of that. As that belief of creating opportunities for others, has that really been the most fundamental thing that's improved your life since you've gone out of the Marine Corps? Or something else that you would point to be like, actually, it's this thing over here that was significant to how far I've been able to take my career after service?
Ooh, that's good. Okay, people are my superpower. Let me tell you. Never met a stranger. I love people. I love hearing their story. I know everybody's got challenges. And so I think trying to figure out what makes people tick, what makes people happy, and just getting to know them is really where it starts for me. So I think making relationships has been super simple for me. And I mean, I wrote a post the other day about turning down my sunshine because that's what people used to say because I'm just a little bit sunnier than most. And that was not, common, I guess, in the Marine Corps. And so whenever you get out and you have to make those relationships, some people just aren't people, and they're not looking for that. So I think that part, if you aren't good at making relationships or getting to know people so that you can get introduced to the right person, and you got to put yourself out there, or you got to show up to a room where there is 150 strangers and you got to just put your hand down and say, my name is Misty Cook. I help people do X and I can help you do this. And you got to practice. It's not going to come easy. It's actually going to be awful those first couple times. Your 20 to 30 second pitch will turn into 60 or 95 seconds and they're just nodding off. But the more you do it, the better you get at it. And then you start to get introduced to a new culture and people will, then they're going to pass your name along and say, you know who you should meet. So I think it's people, that's what makes the world go round, and relationships and nurturing them, not just that one time, but like the gentleman that I offered to buy a cup of coffee. Well, I'm having breakfast with him on Thursday because I will reach out to him and make sure that he knows just how much I appreciate him. That relationship, maybe he and I have never done business and we may never, but he's a mentor now and he's going to be part of my orbit forever because he, set me on that path. So it's when people invest in you, it's just not one and done, but to just stay connected and make sure that they know how valuable they are,
With that too, and we're going to just kind of flip it a little bit. When you do invest, right, not every investment takes off. And then, like you said, relationships take work, right? Whether it's marriage, professional, personal, it takes time. Has there been a failure or a setback when you're building relationships that has just been so monumental, but long-term it actually led to a success?
Okay, give me another way to answer that question. Give me a question, like restate that question.
When building relationships, has there been a time where it was at the moment like just an absolute failure or just put you back a little bit, but it allowed you to move forward to eventually obtain just massive unknown success?
Yeah. I think you learn something with every relationship. And I think there's been times where even with my clients that started and it was going to be, I would even say my clients probably have helped the most because I told you, I just started. And so now it is all referral based. And so one tells another, says, oh my gosh, this can be so valuable for you. And, oh, by the way, you can feel retired at the same time and still be successful. And so I think, something that seems small and it's like, this is just one can completely, if you do a good job and you put everything into it, then it continues. And I just wrote a client, I wrote 3 of my clients tonight and said, I have a potential client, but they need references. Can you chat with them? And so you're constantly leaning on people. So you've got to keep those relationships. You still have to work hard, because you never know when you're going to need them. So yeah, I mean, it just continues to compound. I think the most interesting part now, and I use I use a client relations manager, it's like a CRM, and I know you probably do too with podcasts, but yeah. So I always joke that I'm like, I feel like the service should issue you one like a year before you get out, because you've got to manage all these people and who to follow up with and all the things that when you're inside of this silo, you don't really do that. Like, you don't feel like you have to follow up with the person you just worked with in the G3. You just you do your job and you move on. But when you get out into the civilian world, I think that it's so important is to nurture those relationships and following up with them. And so using systems that keep you organized so that you actually do that, and when the time's passed, you follow up and you say, just checking in. If you need anything, let me know. But yeah, I think so. I think that's a time that's
example
happened.
you have where you didn't follow up and it ended up being at the time a detriment, that you kind of look back to be like, I don't want to ever do that again, because now I see what happens when I continue to follow up and reach out to people?
Probably it's more of I should have reached out to them more often, or maybe it's been too long and they might have showed interest, or they sent me a note and said, I want to learn more. And after that one conversation, I didn't continue. I was like, I told them they weren't interested. And there's probably people that would say, I know that my CRM would say 3 to 5 or 7, especially when you're selling stuff. It's like, you just keep peppering them. I just don't feel like that's kind of my thing, but I probably should follow up once or twice more. And so there has been times that I felt like I might have given up on that one a little too soon. But I think it kind of goes back to what we started with, which is you know what? I know what value I bring, and when you're ready, you'll know where to find me.
Yeah. And speaking of the value you bring, Misty Cook, as we kind of wrap up the episode, how are you better today than yesterday?
Whew. Gosh, every single day, I think I look back and think definitely setting those goals and following up and being honest with myself to know that if I didn't, just to be busy does not mean I'm going to be successful, that I need to make sure that I'm making specific goals, making sure that I take care of my people and everybody feels that they're important and valued as they are. Yeah. And I think probably the most important is knowing that I'm going to continue to grow and evolve. I told you at the beginning of this that, my hope is to help veterans start businesses. It's not just going to be general officers, but in the next year to be able to expand and help anybody start a business, and just be able to do it on a grander scale. So I hope that at the end of this year, we get to come back together and I'm like, I helped 500 people, achieve their dreams and they just didn't know how to do it. And now I've given them a roadmap. So I think being open to evolving and growing and learning.
What was the growth that happened today?
Another sales call. I think every single time I get on a call and I explain what I do and how I do it, you get better at articulating it so that it's a no-brainer and it just makes sense to them. And when they get done and they say, wow, that's really exactly what I need, then I know I'm getting better, because at the beginning it might be, it's just not as succinct. It's kind of like your 30-second pitch gets better and better. And so I think today, I'm going to end today knowing that went really well and I feel really good about it. And I was clearly able to articulate what I can bring to the table.
And you have done a great job of articulating what you bring to the table on this episode. Misty, where can people go find out more about you and what you do over at COC?
Yeah, so you can either find me on my website, which I can send you the link, and then the other thing is definitely LinkedIn. I publish content every week, and so you can always send me a message there, or you can send an email, and I can provide that as well.
Perfect. And I'll make sure we link the website, LinkedIn, and the email address in the show notes for this episode.
Okay,
Misty,
yeah,
thank you so much for sharing your strategies, your methods, your tactics, and most importantly, thanks for having our six. Really appreciate it.
yeah. Thanks so much for having me.